Professor award on this campus, which we don't because it's not politically correct. Although I'm sure we will soon, since things seem to be less politically correct here with every passing year. But if we did have one, two of the people up here would certainly be recipients. One, our next speaker, who I guess if you call somebody an institution on a campus, they feel like they should go take a nap or something. But our next speaker, I think, truly is an institution on the San Francisco State campus. And not only did he get several of his degrees here before getting a PhD from Stanford, but he's also been around for 30 years, most of them on the faculty, and is currently a professor of speech and communication studies. Hank Mcguckin, as I told you earlier, was one of the organizers of that first teach-in on the Vietnam War here. So I think it's really fitting that he can rejoin us today, and whereas the bad news was that Dan Ellsberg couldn't come, the good news was that I persuaded Hank, who's my office mate, took a little bit of arm twisting to take his place, and it's certainly a fitting way to introduce this teach-in, to give us some continuity, not only with the previous speaker, but some continuity with the past. And Hank also was active in the anti-Vietnam War movement all over the Bay Area. In fact, I was at a meeting on Saturday of anti-war activists, and a lady looked at the teach-in flyer and she said, "Oh, Hank Mcguckin, he was with us back in the Vietnam days." And I said, "Yeah, well, come over on Thursday and hear him speak again." It's been my pleasure for the last 15 years to share an office with Hank, and he's really been my friend and mentor in the area of political communication. Between us, we probably teach most of the political communication classes in our department. I try to steal his lecture notes as much as possible, but it just doesn't work coming from me. We've team taught the class on the Vietnam War for the last 5 years. Most of those years we've taught it together. And one of the things that brings us here, because we see way too many parallels in what's happening today with that period. So it's a real pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Hank Mcguckin.
Well, actually, I have very big feet, but I can't possibly fill the shoes of Daniel Ellsberg in a situation like this, so I simply won't even try. I'll simply speak for myself and reflect a little bit. As Carol said, it was 25 years ago that I helped to organize and introduce the first teach-in in the history of this university and most universities at that time. This was a new phenomenon. We were replacing sit-ins, you see, with teach-ins, where we did the work of our university and taught about areas of crisis and tried to raise consciousness and understanding rather than simply blocking doorways and so on, which was also one of our strategies in the peace movement. So that was 25 years ago, and I'd like to say right off the top, I'm not glad to be back. Apparently, however, the ongoing struggle for peace demands that some of us older folks join hands once again with one more generation in jeopardy, yours. A generation threatened by the policy of its own government. I watched television a few nights ago and I saw our good general in command in the Persian Gulf, and he talked about if Saddam Hussein comes through here, we're going to kick his butt. We're going to kick his butt. But the general knows better than any of us that you don't kick butt in war. What happens is the machines of war grind and rend and tear apart the flesh of young men and stain the desert sands with blood and gore, Iraqi and American. That's the only kind of butt that gets kicked. Well, what are those policies that young men are being expected to be prepared to die for? Let me just do a little review, see if I've got some things straight. Just some background about Middle East policy in general. Let's not even talk about 20 years of the Israeli occupation and oppression of the Palestinians. 1982, Israel invades Lebanon. U.S. gives its permission for that. We continue our aid. Syria invades, a counter-invasion. That's okay, that has our permission too. The land of milk and honey then, Lebanon, that's what it was, becomes a scene of incredible ongoing carnage. Over 20,000 civilians are dead as a result, perhaps more. U.S. sends peacekeeping forces, as I recall, in order to generate safe passage for the PLO out of Lebanon. Strange position for us to be in, but it seems to me it was something like that. Safe passage for the PLO to sanctuaries for them that we had arranged in Tunisia. Our peacekeeping forces can't resist, so our peacekeeping battleship, the New Jersey, I believe, shells a Shiite village, shells from 20 miles out at sea the size of Volkswagen bugs. We don't know how many civilians and villagers were killed in that shelling attack. We do know that a few days later, a Shiite teenager drives a truck bomb into the Marine barracks and kills 285 U.S. Marines. And then the U.S. forces withdraw, what's called a redeployment. They redeploy back home and the body bags come home too. Later, Israel bombs the PLO and the sanctuaries we had arranged for them in Tunisia. Some Palestinians are killed, 60 to 70 Tunisian civilians are killed in that raid, but that's all right. It's okay to bomb the sanctuaries that we arrange for people. Does it sound like a curious policy? Sound like it has some strange logic? Well, it gets curiouser. We shift to the Gulf. Let's see if I've got these policies straight in the Gulf. Saddam Hussein is famous for imprisoning, torturing, killing his own left-wing opposition. Caused not a squeak of official U.S. opposition. No cessation of trade or support. 1980, Iraq invades Iran. It's okay, it has our permission to do that. We supply direct and indirect aid. 1981 to 1985 and 6, Reagan, Bush, and Ollie North begin supplying weapons to Iran to resist the Iraqi invasion, which has our approval. Iran, with the help of those weapons, starts to do pretty well in that war, so Iraq begins the tanker war to halt the flow of Iranian oil. Iraq is able to ship its oil by pipeline through the ports at Kuwait. But that's okay. Iraq has our permission to bomb Iranian-bound tankers, crewed and captained by Norwegians, Japanese, and others. Iran takes the position, well, if her oil can't get out, nobody's can, and begins to attack Kuwait-bound tankers. Iran doesn't have permission, so the U.S. sends its fleet to, quote, keep the sea lanes open, unquote, making war on Iran while Iraq continues its attack on Iranian oil-filled tankers, 3-1 as a matter of fact, under our protection. Iraq manages to kill one Norwegian captain, a number of Japanese sailors. Finally, Iraqi planes hit an American frigate and burned to death 37 American sailors. Iraq apologized. They said that was a mistake. We thought the ship was Iranian. Apology accepted. It's okay to do that to Iranian ships. We know it was an accident. We're just here to keep the sea lanes open. Recently, Hussein amasses troops along the Kuwaiti border, threatens Kuwait for pumping out more oil than it had a right to from the shared oil pool and keeping the price of oil down on the world market, which was harming Iraq's suffering economy. He argues also that Kuwait is simply a product of British colonialism created in the 1920s to keep Iraq from having a seaport anyway. Says it does not respect the legitimacy of the existence of Kuwait. U.S. State Department negotiators are in